Hey boys and girls, meteorologist Steve Caparotta here, back with Cap's Corner Summer Camp. It's episode number 3, and today we're talking all about weather radar, one of the most important tools that people like me, meteorologists, use almost on a daily basis. Now, the word radar actually has more meaning behind it. It's an acronym. That means it stands for something, and radar stands for radio detection and ranging. So most importantly, understand that radar involves radio waves. Now, here's what a radar looks like in real life. If you were with me for my intro to weather lesson in week 1, we gave you a look at a picture like this, but I said it kind of looks like a big giant soccer ball, doesn't it, up on a tower. Now, within that big giant soccer ball, that dome, there's an antenna. And this antenna, although it's not shown here, that antenna is actually rotating or spinning within the ball. And as it's rotating and spinning around, it sends out radio waves. That's what these things are. As those radio waves travel across the sky, if they bounce into anything, namely like a raindrop, that's what we've got right here, some of that radio wave gets bounced back to the radar. Then the radar can do some math, it can do some calculations, and it can figure out A, how far away the rainfall is, and B, how heavy the rainfall is or how heavy the precipitation is. Now, a real simple thing to remember about radar that I love to remind kids, like to say very simply, radar shows us rain. All right, so I want you to say it along with me. Radar shows us what? Rain. Radar shows us rain. So this is how you guys will most often see radar in action, whether it be on the news or on a website or on an app, on a tablet, on a phone. You're typically going to see it look at something like this. And when you see this, usually when you look at the yellows, the oranges, the reds, those represent the heavier rains, the bigger storms. The greens represent the lighter rains. Now, depending on what website or app you're looking at, sometimes you might see some blue. Usually the blues are also the lighter rainfall. Now, 30 years or so ago, we got a new type of radar. It's called Doppler radars, a real big advancement in meteorology and what we do. And Doppler radar is based off of something called the Doppler effect or the Doppler principle. So hang with me for a second. I'm going to explain it to you real quick and why it's important and what we do with these Doppler radars. So here's our radar right here. What are these little curved lines? Those are our radio waves. And there's space between the radio waves. The space between two radio waves is called the wavelength, okay? Space between these two radio waves is called wavelength. So in the first example, we've got a storm over here that's stationary. It's not moving. So as our radar sends out these radio waves, they bounce into the storm, and the wavelength stays the same. The spacing between the radio waves stays the same as that energy comes back to the radar. But in the second example, we've got a radar here, and we've got a storm that's moving toward the radar. And then we start to see things change a bit. So we send out our radio waves with a certain wavelength, certain space between those radio waves, and because the storm is moving towards the radar, as those radio waves bounce off the storm, they become compressed, and the wavelength actually gets shorter. You see how the waves get closer together? So we get a change in that wavelength. Now, in the opposite example, if we have our radar over here and the storm is moving away from the radar, our radio waves go out at their given wavelength. As they bounce off of the storm, the wavelength actually increases. The amount of space between the two radio waves increases. So that's another change that we can detect using Doppler radar. So how can you boys and girls actually see this Doppler effect, this Doppler principle in action? The most common way that, most common example people use is a train moving along the track. So if you guys were outside and you could safely stand back from the train tracks but watch a train come by, you might hear the train horn. It sounds different as it approaches you to when it actually passes you. Check out this example. So did you notice how it sounded different as the train was coming towards the person, and then once it passed them? That's because of this Doppler effect, this Doppler principle. The sound waves, the wavelength is changing as the train gets closer and then gets farther away. Now, it's kind of a complicated thing to understand, right? What I wanted you to know, though, is this Doppler principle, this Doppler effect, helps us in weather, using Doppler radar, helps us understand what the winds are doing within a storm. So that's why it's real important to us. And so why is it real important to be able to detect winds in a storm and what they're doing? It helps with things like this. A tornado. This was a big tornado in New Orleans back in February 2017. This was an EF3, a strong one. But Doppler radar, why it was so important when it came about and remains very important, it really helps meteorologists figure out if there might be a tornado within a storm. Now here's another example of what you might see with radar and trying to figure out if there's a tornado. Sometimes we get this. You see how it kind of looks like there's a hook shape to it? We call this a hook echo. Now sometimes, not always, but sometimes when you see a hook echo like this, that can mean there's a tornado within the storm. So this was in Livingston Parish back in February 2017. And you can almost kind of, if you can use your imagination, the way you get this shape is the winds are punching into the storm right there. That's why you kind of get that notch, and then they're wrapping back around. So a hook echo is something that meteorologists look for to know whether there might be a tornado within a storm. But Doppler radar gives us an even better look. Instead of just looking at rain with radar, this is a different product we can look at. You might sometimes see it labeled velocity. What is velocity? That's speed. How quickly are the winds moving within the storm? So using this radar product, we're actually seeing what the winds are doing. And so if you look at an image, a picture like this, anytime you see it, a couple of important things to understand. Number one, where you see the red, that's where the radar is detecting the wind blowing away from the radar. So in this example, our radar is over here, and where you see the red, the wind is going away. Now where you see the greens and the blue shades, that's where the wind is blowing toward the radar over here. And so one thing we know as meteorologists is if we see the reds and the greens next to each other, the reds, the greens, and the blues next to each other, especially if they're real close to each other, we can call it a velocity couplet. But most importantly, just know if the reds and greens are next to each other, that indicates there's some sort of rotation within the storm. And then we can do some more analysis to try and figure out if there might actually be a tornado there. So that's what Doppler radar has done for us. Now, in even more recent years, there's been another advancement in radar. It's called dual pole radar. So Doppler radar, old Doppler radars, would just send out a horizontal pulse of energy, wait for it to come back, and that was it. Dual pole sends out that horizontal pulse of energy, but also sends out the vertical one, okay? So dual pole has some added benefits and advantages over our traditional Doppler radar. Number one, another thing we can do with radar is estimate how much rain has fallen or how much precipitation has fallen. Dual pole does even better than the old Doppler radars at estimating how much rain has fallen. Dual pole helps us figure out the precipitation that's being detected. Is it rain? Is it hail? Is it sleet? Is it snow? How can it do that? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that it can detect the shape of the precipitation within the cloud because it's sending out both the horizontal and the vertical pulses. Dual pole also helps us detect whether there might be debris that's been lifted up into the sky by a tornado. So as a tornado moves along the ground, might knock down some trees, tree limbs, whatever it's in its path, and it'll sometimes pick up some of that debris, loft it up into the sky. And what's really neat about dual pole radar is now it helps us figure out what the radar is detecting. Is it detecting raindrops, or is it maybe detecting something else that a tornado has picked up off the ground? So here's how we can do that in real life. So the product that we use with dual pole radar, again, this is a couple of big words, but it's called correlation coefficient. You don't need to know what that means, but let me explain to you what this image means as I look at it as a meteorologist. Everywhere that I see the red on here, that's the radar saying that what it's bouncing off of in the sky is basically about the same size and shape. So one thing we know is that when rain is around, when we've got clouds around us, if there's just rain up there, then this should all pretty much look red because raindrops, generally speaking, are pretty similar in size and shape. But if radar starts picking up on some objects in the sky that are different in size and shape, it'll kind of color them in different on this image. So you see this little area that's circled where we've got yellow kind of within the red? That's kind of an uh-oh to meteorologists. That's saying there might be some debris up in the sky, maybe lofted up there from a tornado. So that really helps us out. Now, let me give you even a better example how we can put that into action. I think this was out of Missouri in 2019. So we're going back. This is the velocity image where we look at what the winds are doing within the storm. So remember, red means the winds are doing what? They're going away from the radar, right? And then the green means that the winds are going toward. But the bottom line is we've got red and green next to each other, so I told you that means this storm is rotating or spinning. But if we take that in conjunction with that correlation coefficient thing I was telling you about, then we see there's a big uh-oh, because we see here we've got rotation, and then in the same spot, instead of all red, we've got some different colors, some blues, some greens, some yellows. So if meteorologists see a storm where the velocity is showing rotation and then the correlation coefficient is showing some area where the things are different in size and shape, then we know there's a good chance this is what we call a tornadic debris signature. There's debris being lifted up by a tornado, and then we have more confidence that there's a tornado out there. So that's something that dual pole radar really helps us figure out. All right, there's some limitations with radar. One of the things that happens on any given day is depending on what the temperature looks like from the ground all the way up into the sky, the radar beam kind of behaves a little bit differently. So we have what's called sub-refraction. Now the radar beam's always going to bend somewhat as it travels through the sky, okay? Sub-refraction is when it actually bends less than usual, so it kind of travels higher up into the sky than expected. The opposite of that is what we call super-refraction. That's when the radar beam gets bent down more to the ground. And an even more extreme example of that is what we call ducting. And this is when the radar beam here really bends down to the ground and may actually bounce off of things on the ground. You guys can actually kind of see this in action a lot during the morning hours, especially here in the summertime. What's going on? Well, in the summer, we often have in the morning what's called the temperature inversion. So normally in the atmosphere, temperature down here at the ground is, you know, whatever it is. Let's say it's 75 degrees on a summer morning. As you go higher up in the sky, typically it's going to get cooler and cooler. But when you have a temperature inversion, it's 75 degrees at the ground, and you might go a few hundred feet above the ground, and we get a little layer of warm air where it might actually be like 80 degrees, for example. And what that does is it kind of traps the radar beam and makes it bend back down to the ground. Then the radar starts bouncing off of trees and buildings, and so you'll start to see some green showing up on the radar. It's not rain, it's just because the radar beam is being bent and bouncing off of things on the ground. All right, now I want to talk a little bit around the Baton Rouge area. Our radars are kind of far away from us. The closest one is about 80 miles away in Slidell. Then you've got radars in Lake Charles and Fort Polk that are each about 120 miles away. So that's not ideal. We'd rather have a radar closer. That would give us better coverage. Now we do have one other radar down here west of New Orleans in St. Charles Parish. It's called a terminal Doppler radar. That's mostly there for the airport that's in Kenner. But these terminal Doppler radars are less powerful than our traditional radars like the one in Slidell and like the ones in Lake Charles and Fort Polk. And this terminal Doppler doesn't really help us a whole lot in Baton Rouge. So why is it a problem that Baton Rouge is kind of far away from the radar? Well, here's one issue with it. Because the earth is curved, right? You boys and girls know that? You see how the green is curved? That's supposed to be the surface of the earth. So the radar beam, when it leaves the radar, it's already shooting a little bit above horizontal. It's not going straight out. We tilt it up a little bit. So the farther the radar beam gets from the radar, it gets higher up in the sky. And that's made even worse by the fact that the Earth curves. So when we look at a radar image, if you've got a storm that's really close to the radar, we're getting a good look at the storm, especially the lower part of the storm. But the farther away you get from the radar, the higher up you're going to be looking at the storm. Why is that important? Well, if we're trying to figure out if there's a tornado or strong winds, we really want to see this lower part. And if we're too far away from the radar, we're really shooting above where there might be a tornado or some strong winds. So that's one of the real problems with radar being far away. Another thing that happens with us being kind of far away is this purple stuff sometimes shows up on the radar. What is that purple stuff, you might say? Well, we kind of nicknamed it purple haze. It's also called range folding. It's basically, if you ever see that show up, it's the radar saying, oh boy, I'm kind of confused on what I'm seeing, when you see that purple haze or that range folding. But here's what it really means. So the radar sends out a pulse, it bounces off of a storm, starts to come back, but it sends out the second pulse of energy before the first one gets back. And then the radar is confused on what it's actually seeing. That is range folding. And because here in Baton Rouge, we're pretty far away from the radar, we often fall within that area of range folding when we try to look at what the winds are doing within the storm. So that's kind of a limitation. Now, there's some hope that one of those radars might be moving closer to Baton Rouge within the next couple of years. Hopefully that happens, and that should start to improve our radar coverage and our ability to see things if that does indeed happen. Now, I wanted to give you a few other examples of things we can see using Doppler radar. Look at this one. You see this spike here? Here's a storm, but do you see how there's kind of a spike coming out from it? Well, meteorologists, we know, if we're trained right, we know this is something called a hail spike. So if we see a strong storm out there, and you see kind of a spike appearance going out in one direction, that's a signature. That's something we know often means that the radar is hitting some hail out in that storm. We can also look at things like this. Look at this. This looks like a big jellyfish, doesn't it? This was up in Memphis, but let me tell you what we're actually looking at. So when a storm develops, the storm sends a bunch of rain on down to the ground. As that rain's coming down, it brings a bunch of cool air with it. Well, what happens when the cool air hits the ground? It's got nowhere to go, right? It's got to start spreading out because it's hit a barrier. It's got nowhere to go. What this is showing is what we call an outflow boundary. That's the leading edge of the cool air from those storms hitting the ground and then expanding out in all directions. That's what that's showing. This is one of the more dramatic examples I've ever seen. Now, these outflow boundaries, they can be important because sometimes they'll develop and new storms can sometimes form along those boundaries, but that's something else we can see with radar. We can see things that aren't even related to weather, like birds, believe it or not. That's right. So this was back in 2017. This is down around Laplace. Watch this loop again. You see this ring that starts to develop and spread out? Believe it or not, these are birds that are nesting and then taking off in the morning hours. Sometimes call them Roost Rings, okay? Here's another example of that. This is from 2015 where we had several of them show up. So this is something I'll often see around sunrise. If we watch radar, you know, birds, they'll be in their nests and they start to take off around sunrise and you'll get these rings showing up. That's the radar beam bouncing off of flocks of birds taking off in the sky. We can also see things like this. This is a pretty cool example out of Texas. So this was back last year, 2020. Let this loop again. A storm was approaching. There's a bunch of caves in Texas, boys and girls, with a lot of bats. And in this case, see these rings? These are actually the bats leaving the caves. Whether it's because the storm was coming, who knows? But we can sometimes see things like bats. And then there's this kind of a sad example of something we saw, but just give you an idea that there's many things we can see with radar. Back in 2003, Mom and Dad will remember this for the younger boys and girls, but there was the Space Shuttle Columbia that actually kind of broke apart as it was coming down from space back to Earth. And the radar, this is the radar in Lake Charles, actually picked up, you see this line developing here? That is actually the debris from the space shuttle breaking up and being detected by radar. So I wanted to show you that radar has many other uses besides just for weather. All right, let me pull up, I wanted to show you quickly before we wrap up. I wanted to show you that you can access a website where we have all the lessons. Give me a second to get it pulled up here on my iPad. But if you go to wafb.com/capscorner, all of our lessons will be posted there. So now I've got the page up. So here it is. I'll scroll down for you and show you. We've got our first lesson, Intro to Weather, posted. We did some worksheets. We've got the answer key. Last week's lesson, we went all over clouds and precipitation. That's posted. Worksheets, answer key. Today's lesson will be posted. We'll have some worksheets that you can do once again. And as always, you can catch these on Facebook, on WAFB Plus, on YouTube, or you can go back and watch them on WAFB Plus and YouTube if you want to watch them that way. Here's what's ahead as we move forward through the remainder of the summer. So we talked all about radar today. Next week, it's going to be about our weather satellites, another really important tool that we use. Satellites this time of year can be real important with hurricanes, which, by the way, will be our next lesson after satellites. So the day after the 4th of July, we're going to talk all about hurricanes. After that, I'm going to show you how to use paper hurricane tracking maps. Your mom and dad probably grew up on these like I did. We're going to show you guys how to use them. We'll get into tornadoes, and then the last lesson of the summer is how meteorologists make forecasts. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. So that's all I had today on Weather Radar. If you're watching live on YouTube, on Facebook, now we'll go ahead and take your questions. Be happy to answer whatever I can. All right, everybody, welcome back here in studio, and hopefully you learned a thing or two about weather radar today. Kind of feels appropriate to have this lesson today. We've gotten an early start to some showers and storms around the area here in South Louisiana on this Monday morning. So now if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, happy to take any questions you might have, and we'll kind of run through it. I'm peeking up, see YouTube, no questions there. Let me take a glance down now to Facebook. So again, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments and give me a moment. I'm going to hop around here a little bit. But coming up next week, as you heard, we'll get into weather satellites. So another really important weather tool that we use really on a daily basis. But hope you learned a thing or two today. Renee is saying the weather for today, please. Okay. So Renee, obviously we're doing these weather lessons for kids, but what I can tell you is kind of off and on showers through the storm, off and on showers and storms today through the day. This afternoon and right on into tonight even. Pretty good rain chance going to continue. More rain to come tomorrow before by the end of the week, second half of the week, a little closer to a typical summertime pattern where we see more of our scattered afternoon storms. Hi, Karen. I see you there. Linda saying great idea for kids. Thanks for that. Kaniki is watching, so good deal. Let's see if we got any questions rolling in here, though. Got some comments. So we'll be back next Monday at the same time, 10 o'clock, and as always, take any questions, too, that you have. Watson saying, how can I sign my kids up for this? So there's nothing to really sign up for. We'll be doing these. So this was the third lesson that I've done, third Monday we've done this. We've got 5 more to go every Monday going forward through the end of July. If you missed the first couple, you can always go back and watch them, not only on there on Facebook, which might take a little digging to find them on Facebook, but you can find them on our YouTube page, on our YouTube channel, WAFB, or if you have WAFB Plus, our app on your Roku, on your Fire Stick, on your Apple TV. There's a dedicated little area on there where these lessons are posted, so you can always go back and watch them. But no need to sign up. You can also go to our website, wafb.com/capscorner. They're there. And also on that page is where I post the worksheets. I've got answer keys that go along, but we've now got 3 weeks worth of worksheets that the kids can do if you print it out for them. All right, let's see. Yeah, a lot of people mentioning the rain, no doubt about it. We've had plenty of that. All right, just taking another peek to see if we had any questions rolling in. No questions so far, which I guess is a good thing. Let's switch back over here. Yeah, as we talk about radar, radar getting a bit of a workout next couple of days. It looks like here at Channel 9 already over an inch of rainfall this morning, so pretty good soaking. All right, I'll give it just another second, see if any questions roll in before we go ahead and wrap it up. As always, I've got the lessons planned out for the summer, but welcome any feedback you guys have on these segments, or if there's anything you'd like covered. You know, I haven't done it yet, but what we'll probably do, I'm probably going to try to find some time. Last summer when I did these, not only did we do kind of the lessons like I had today, we did some live interviews. Interviewed a forecaster at the National Hurricane Center, interviewed somebody from the National Weather Service, interviewed a hurricane hunter. May try to line up some of those again in the days ahead. So if there's anybody in particular weather-wise that you think you'd like to hear from, let me know and we'll see if we can set that up. Audrey saying she's watching. Thanks for watching. Audrey peeking up to YouTube again. Not seeing any questions there. Not seeing anything rolling in on Facebook. All right, so if there's nothing else, hopefully we answered any questions. We'll be back here next Monday, same time, 10 o'clock. Again, trying to keep the lessons around 20 minutes so that the kids can hopefully kind of stay tuned in. But we'll be back next week talking all about weather satellites. So make sure you tune in then. And if there's anything you want to go back and watch or you missed, WAFB.com/Caps Corner. See you next week at 10.